A very warm welcome to the Bucerius Kunstforum and our exhibition Sean Scully, Stories. Dublin-born Sean Scully is one of the outstanding abstract artists of our day. In the post-war years, art was dominated by minimalism, hard-edge painting, op art, and abstract expressionism. In the early 1980s, Scully successfully revitalized and updated non-representational painting for a new generation. His paintings are not smooth and coolly distant, but directly personal. They tell stories and play with metaphors, encouraging viewers to explore their own associations and emotions. At first glance, Scully's compositions seem to be stringently structured with sharply delineated color fields. Yet when we take a closer look, we notice visible coarse brushstrokes and the layers underneath shimmering through. The fields of color do not have hard edges. Without definite contours, the spaces between and the edges seem to quiver, pulsating with their own rhythm. Working in close cooperation with the artist and his studio, Katrin Baumstark has curated our retrospective in honor of Sean Scully's 80th birthday. You can look forward to a variety of works from an oeuvre covering over 60 years. Not just his monumental paintings, but also works on paper, photographs, and sculptures. One particular focus is on Scully's early works, as yet rarely exhibited. These offer an insight into his artistic development from figurative painting to strictly non-representational art and the emergence of his own inimitable formal language. While preparing the exhibition, curator Katrin Baumstark met Sean Scully several times. Thanks to their recorded conversations, we can include many of the artist's comments in his own words, offering a very personal access to the works exhibited here. The world of music is also profoundly important in Sean Scully's life and work, and he sees a close relationship between it and his art. Not only does he listen to music while painting, but in some cases even refers specifically to pieces or songs. In this audio tour, we play short extracts from the songs Scully associates with the works discussed. Incidentally, if you'd like to hear the full versions and the music Scully associates with other works on show, you can. The artist's playlist can be accessed via the QR code on display at the start of the exhibition. This tour was prepared by Daria Dittmeier-Hüssel from the articles in the German exhibition catalogue on sale at the ticket desk or in the museum shop. The texts were edited and the audio tour produced by Katrin Reiling, the Klangkosmonauten, and the Eimsbütteler Tonstudio. The English translation is by Andrew Borum. This tour is narrated by me, Ian Wood, and of course includes Sean Scully's original comments. To enjoy the audio tour's full functionality in the museum, make sure your device has the location sharing feature activated. Then, log on to the museum's Wi-Fi wireless network as BKF Gast. In the course of the tour, some artworks are mentioned by name which offer an important insight into the exhibition. As a rule, you'll find images of those works in this app. Once you have selected a particular tour commentary, just swipe the display of your device to one side to show the works referred to. And now, enjoy the exhibition. Sean Scully, Stories.
Don't know much about history. Don't know much biology. Don't know much about a science book.
Sean Scully was born in Dublin on the 30th of June 1945. When he was 4, with the Irish economy sluggish and many struggling to make ends meet, his family emigrated to England. Scully grew up in a poor working-class district of London. Even though his family had no connection to art, he became interested in painting very early on, especially through his visits to Catholic churches. There, he looked at images depicting the Passion of Christ, the story of Jesus' arrest, suffering, and crucifixion. Scully painted Chancery Rents in 1962, when he was just 17 years old. At that time, he was an apprentice in a printing shop.
And it's the gloomy, claustrophobic lane where I worked on the left in the building with the red stripes on it. And what's interesting about it to me is the solutions that I come up with. So there's grids everywhere. So obviously I lived in a world of grids, and I lived, in a world of factories, basically. There is, however, something that I noticed later, which is unbelievable interesting to me. And that is the sign hanging up in the air, halfway between me and God. And it says, artist's agent. And there it is. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an artist.
That same year, Scully first took evening classes at the Central School of Art and Design in London. He was primarily interested in figural painting and was profoundly impressed by a work by Vincent van Gogh. Painted in 1888, the work known as Van Gogh's Chair simply shows a rustic wooden chair with a woven straw seat. To see the picture, just swipe your display. Scully regularly went to view Van Gogh's painting in the Tate Gallery, the large London museum where it was then on show. It made everything possible to me. It made it possible for me to enter the world of art and to think that I could actually make paintings, because it was so honest and direct. Over the following years, Scully made a living from various jobs. For a time, for instance, he even owned and ran a music club. Here you can see just how strongly his later paintings resonate with this early work. Despite its figurative depiction, the architecture in Chancery Rents already points to the non-representational patterns and grids which became iconic in Scully's oeuvre. In 1966 and 1967, Sean Scully painted a series of sitting figures in oil pastels. These works reveal Scully's fascination with European Expressionism, especially Ernst Ludwig Kirchner and Carl Schmidt-Rottluff, as well as the French Fauve artists such as Henri Matisse and André Derain. This man in chair is immediately identifiable as such, although the forms of the world of objects around him are strongly abstracted. Apart from the title's eponymous elements, no other details are recognizable. In comparison, the choice of colors and composition of the surfaces are crucially important. The figure almost dissolves into the colors around it. The face and right foot have fused with the blue surface dominating the picture. Talking about this work, Scully refers to the parallels with German Expressionism, but describes the colors as more monumental.
German Expressionism is very nervous, especially in Kirchner. Oh my God. When you look at his paintings, they look as if he's going to have a nervous breakdown. These paintings don't. They seem almost sculptural in their solidity.
Here, the figure's character and mood are not evoked through the man's nose or eyes, expression or clothes. Instead, it's all done by color and form. They are the immediate pictorial symbols. In contrast, the brushstrokes play a subordinate role in conveying emotion, quite unlike in Expressionism or Scully's later works after 1981. In 1965, the year before he painted this series, Scully turned 20. It was a crucial period in his life. Not only was his son Paul born, but Scully also began to study painting at Croydon College of Art in London. He had a long list of rejections, no less than 11, from almost all other London art colleges. But now, thanks to a student grant, he could focus entirely on painting. In addition to his interest in European Expressionist art, he now discovered abstract Expressionism. Emerging in America in the 1940s, abstract expressionism covers a variety of styles. Its two main movements, though, were action painting and color field painting. Over the next years, Scully increasingly turned to non-figurative art. By 1968, this was a driving force in his decision to move on to Newcastle University, which specialized particularly in abstract art. At university, he met Rosemary Purnell, who he married a few years later.
Je suis africain, africain du nord au sud. Je suis africain.
In 1969, Scully visited Morocco for the first time, a trip which had a radical impact on his art. The patterns and colors of local textiles and the quality of light in this North African country inspired him in a completely new way. Shortly after returning from Morocco, he painted Backcloth, one of his early grid paintings, or more precisely, overlays. The horizontal and vertical lines do not seem to be simply painted one over the other, but create the illusion of three-dimensional space through layering, shading, and the succession of interacting lines. The effect also calls to mind the structure of a woven carpet. Scully applied commercial masking tape to ensure the lines of color are clearly delineated, and their razor-sharp edges locate the work within hard-edge painting. Apart from his impressions of Morocco, Scully drew on various other sources of inspiration for this particular style, including the work of Piet Mondrian, a Dutch constructivist artist from the first half of the 20th century, and the clear linear design of steel and glass modernist architecture. In 1919, Mondrian was the first artist to cover a canvas with a grid-like pattern and fill the fields with color. To see an example of those works, just swipe your display. At first glance, Scully's painting seemed completely non-representational. Yet, through its illusion of space, he also creates a connection to the world of objects. Obviously, if you have an abstract painting, you've lost the possibility to tell stories, because you've lost the human figure. So, as a compensating element, I thought that perhaps I could make the painting so it was systematically overlapping and at the same time would retain the pleasure of illusionism. This, I thought, would help to keep the visual interest going, the human need for narrative and representation. For Scully, from now on creating space through, among other things, the use of shadow, was a link to representational art. Moreover, the design of the edges was just as important. Unlike the carpets which he saw in Morocco, the edges of Scully's paintings are not symmetrical.
I was very aware that they all had four edges. And I'm very concerned with this, in part because of my interest in carpets and the edges of carpets. They usually have identical edges, top and bottom, and on the side. And what I tried to do was to make the four edges different. Mm-hmm. On this one, the left edge and the right edge are different, but the top and bottom are very similar. But what I tried to do here is to compensate the lack of the figure with a kind of figuration in the grid, because it's illusionistic. So anyway, this was the start.
The uneven edges bring out the cropped-like nature of the picture. There is neither a center nor any single area charged with meaning. Instead, each part has equal significance, as in an all-over painting, just like the surfaces of Jackson Pollock's drip paintings from the 1950s. In 1972, some years after painting Backcloth, Scully graduated from Newcastle University with a bachelor's degree in art, and, for a short time, taught painting there. A Harvard University fellowship enabled him to travel to the USA, the first of his longer stays in that country.
Woke up this morning feeling fine, 'cause there was something special on my
In the 1970s, Scully experimented with various techniques and materials, from spray guns to commercial masking tape and colors. For Scully, these all evoked the industrial proletariat and his own working-class roots. For Hidden Drawing in 1975, he used acrylic paints and masking tape. The picture is divided into 9 squares, rather like a chessboard. Each square has a pattern design. The painting does not create a sense of three-dimensional space. The remains of different colored masking tape give this balanced composition a certain restlessness, producing a subtle tension, something that shows the influence of American minimal art. During his time in the USA, Scully had developed a simplified formal idiom in his painting. His first major solo show was staged by London's Rowan Gallery in 1973. The show comprised 6 of his works, and all of them were sold. But when another show was organized there 2 years later with works including Hidden Drawing, October 1st, 75, Scully could not build on that initial success. In 1975, that same year, he moved permanently to New York. There he lived with the artist Catherine Lee. In 1977, he had a solo show in New York, his first in America. Scully and Catherine Lee married the following year. In America, Scully became increasingly interested in the minimal art movement. Between 1975 and 1980, he executed a series of almost entirely monochrome paintings, in black or other dark color tones. These compositions are dominated by their division into equal blocks of color, arranged horizontally or vertically. Horizontal bands or stripes in slightly different color tones, applied using masking tape, run across the squares. During these years, Scully's vertical grid lines and patterns disappeared from his works. In retrospect, he interpreted this change psychologically. Leaving London and losing his European world also meant he had lost these stabilizing vertical lines.
These paintings, these black and grey paintings, which are extremely hardcore abstraction, as severe as abstraction gets, I would say. These paintings are as severe as any minimal paintings. And I was, in a sense, proving myself in America and integrating myself on the elite level.
Italian number 2 comprises 3 black squares, arranged one on top of the other. Both the upper and the lower field have stripes. The central square is free of stripes, but here the brushstrokes are visible.
So the middle panel is the bridge between the beginning and the end of the painting. It's the mediator. And also making a bridge between figuration and abstraction, which is something I often do.
These works were inspired by the nocturnes by American-born artist James McNeill Whistler. In the 1870s, he painted a series of nighttime scenes of London. But Whistler was not interested in painting the traditional cityscapes. Instead, he wanted to use color values to create moods. Whistler's contemporaries were highly critical of his nocturnes. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, as these pioneering works in evoking moods through painterly style were completed even before the Impressionists made their mark on the art scene. It is also worth noting that Scully cites Whistler, a 19th century figural artist, as his inspiration, and not, for instance, that icon of abstract art, Kazimir Malevich's Black Square. The figural is always implicit in Scully's works, whether visible or not. Even in this phase of radical abstraction, Scully never entirely broke this link to figuration. But the central square of Italian number 2 does herald a change. For the first time in some years, the stripes, previously so rigorous, are now applied more freely.
Early one morning the sun was shining. I was laying in bed.
Wondering if she'd changed it all, if her hair was still red.
Around 1980, Scully sensed the need for a fundamental change in his art. Now, he felt that minimalism was anti-humanist. After all, where in it is the human being as the creator and beholder of art? He wanted his paintings to become more expressive and accessible, and once again create space for stories and metaphors. In this period, there was a general tendency to return to the figural, not just in America, but on a broad international level. Previously, it had primarily been pop art that was associated with a representational style. Nonetheless, Scully remained true to his abstract formal language. But he refreshed and updated it for a new generation, making it more personal and resonating with emotions and associations. He now put the masking tape to one side and painted lines and stripes freehand in a coarser and more visible brushstroke. Rather than having hard edges, the individual color fields are open and soft, and as you see, allow the lower layers of color to shimmer through. So when we take a closer look, what still resembles hard-edge painting at a distance turns out to be handcrafted in a personal signature style. In the early 1980s, Scully began creating multi-piece paintings, playing with the borders between 2- and 3-dimensionality. Is it a painting or a relief? The works build in the form of diptychs or triptychs, the 2- or 3-panel works initially used for religious art, often as altarpieces in churches. As in Lost Land, Scully's vertical pictorial elements often allude to the human figure.
It's interesting to note that most of these blocks that are in the middle of the painting somewhere are taken from my own hip measurement. I move my hands forward from my hips, and that gives me the width of the panel. It stands for a figure in a lost land.
Lost Land is dominated by color tones of rust red.
Lost land. In a way, a very brutal painting. And it's about lost land. It's almost an apocalyptic painting, but it stays within the realm of geometric abstraction, but on the very edge of it, the last gasp of where order is able to stabilize a kind of erosion or entropy. And obviously it's a metaphor for brokenness or barrenness.
The subject and formal idiom could also be understood as reflecting a difficult personal phase in Scully's life. In 1983, his son Paul died in a car accident in London, an event which, according to Scully, gave him a bleak view of the world.
Sweets for my sweets, sugar for my honey, your tasty kiss thrills me so. Sweets for my sweets, sugar for my honey.
This one is a really great example of the mid-80s, and I called it Now because it seems so present. You know, the color is so vital, and it's one of the few occasions where I use a diagonal, which I've now started to include in my work more. And I like it because it sets up a kind of movement. You know, the window is very restless and it activates the security of the rest of the painting. It's almost like an embrace where the blue and orange and red and pink are embracing and holding something in a kind of security. They're stopping it from jumping out of the painting.
Since the 1980s, Scully has been incorporating insets into his paintings. These inlaid rectangular elements, often quite small, create a particular visual effect in a larger painting. Usually the frames and inset are painted independently of each other, and the two autonomous compositions only collide when the inset is added. If he considers it necessary, Scully might then rework part of the overall composition, add other inserts, or indeed, as here, make other changes later as well. For instance, Scully finished his painting Now in 1986, but the next year he radically recomposed it. He rotated the right half of the work 180 degrees so the diagonal striped inset, as you see, connects with the left-hand panel. As a result, it was no longer isolated at the edge, but in Scully's words, was embraced by the other panels. Stone Light from 1992 is a triptych, a work of 3 parts, with a protruding central panel. Scully himself has compared it to an altarpiece and connects the red and black field at the top right with blood. In the Catholic Church, the blood of Christ is at the heart of the celebration of the Eucharist at the altar. In 1993, art historian Armin Zweiter dedicated an entire article to Scully's Stone Light, providing an essential and fundamental insight into his art. The deliberately rough technical execution is quite striking. Looking at the stripes, you might think that in the details, someone tried with insufficient materials and without sufficient skill to paint regular fields of color with clear borders. Only in this detail of the application of the colors, and certainly not in their choice and nuancing or their formal design, his paintings constantly convey the impression of being worked on by some kind of inept house painter and decorator or an untrained DIY enthusiast. This is obviously intentional, since in this way, in the apparently perfect imperfection of his surfaces, Scully successfully manages to preserve the remains of a yet-to-be-decided spontaneity, which in the urban milieu of a thoroughly rationalized world may appear like the sign of an unalienated existence. The art historian Armin Zweiter viewed the interfaces of stripes or surfaces as having a particular significance. Where they touch gently, they have narrow furrows, lesions, and distortions. Here, the color materials literally seem to quiver and breathe. In any case, the beholder's gaze advances into different areas or encounters obstacles, has to take detours or shortcuts. Scully felt that Armin Zweiter understood his work better than almost any other art expert. In general, past and present, Scully's work has received considerable recognition in Germany, and this means a great deal to him. After all, he not only sees himself in the tradition of German painting, but also had one of his first solo shows on the European mainland in Munich. Around 10 years after he painted Stone Light, Scully was appointed as a professor of painting at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich. He worked there until 2007. Even today, he still has a home in Moos-Urach in Upper Bavaria.
I went down to the place where I knew she lay waiting, under the marble and the snow. I said, Mother, I'm frightened.
And these titles that are used in several works, Durango, make a reference to this almost impossible to live in state of Mexico that's full up with rocks. It's the equivalent of the desert in America, and in fact Connemara in Ireland.
Many of Scully's paintings from these years, the early 1990s, are informed by the battle between light and dark, between joy and sadness. As a rule, neither emerges the winner. After all, as Scully says, life comprises both extremes. But the faded greyish-white of Durango creates a rather despondent mood. The version of Durango on show here is worked in pastels.
And one of the reasons I did pastels was because it was a forgotten medium. So it's part of the underdog thing about me. So the pastel was consigned to history, and I thought, okay, I'm going to fix that.
In the late 1970s, on his travels, Scully began to take photos, in an artistic sense. But nevertheless, he only took shots in passing.
And it's just a view from the roadside, and I stop and take a picture. I take a picture that probably nobody else would notice.
It's not hard to see what caught his eye. Structures of colors and forms set in a certain spatial relationship. In his photographs in particular, we find walls of stone and brick, doors and windows. According to Scully, the surfaces tell stories of human culture and the power of time, or in other words, transience. Untitled, Morocco could even be a minimalist painting, if it weren't for the strip of grass in the lower third of the photo, grounding the viewer by locating the motif in profane reality. Scully's photographs are not an ersatz for travel sketches. In the 19th century, back in their studios, many artists worked up the sketches they made on their travels. But Scully's photos are not a model for paintings. He only takes the emotions captured in a photograph to inspire other works.
I'm very interested in the ordinary, or the sublime in the ordinary. And there's a romantic impulse in it, but it's always tethered to the working classes, because I identify so strongly with the working classes. And that's why my paintings are never going to get fancy.
Scully took his untitled Morocco photograph on a trip to that country in 1995. His photographic works were first exhibited in a show 2 years later. Soon afterwards, he issued Atlas Walls, a limited edition portfolio with 24 photographs, an homage to Morocco, a country which has proven a major influence on his work. As early as the 1980s, Scully began to add several canvases or other support materials to his paintings, giving them a more sculptural quality. With his floating paintings in 1995, he took the next step towards conquering three-dimensional space. This series of works comprises flat boxes, which, singly or together, protrude vertically from the wall into the space around them. Similarly to Scully's paintings, the aluminium boxes are painted with stripes. Yet, if you look more closely, you'll notice only 3 sides are painted. The upper and lower narrow sides, as well as the sides facing the wall, are still visibly metal surfaces. Here, it's important to remember these are boxes. They enclose a space. They are hollow. But are they empty? Or are they filled with some controversial content? What do they conceal? That remains Scully's secret. In formal terms, his floating paintings recall Donald Judd's stacks of cantilevered boxes. Scully, though, sets his work off from that famous exponent of minimalism.
The huge difference is that they're actually paintings. So you have this strange argument about identity. What are they? Are they paintings or are they sculptures? And when you have Judd, they're emphatically sculptures because the surfaces are industrial. Even if they're glamorous, they are neutral. They don't have a personality. These have personality.
As with Judd's stacks, the floating paintings are also about space, the viewer's space, and the space between and in the boxes. Moreover, Scully understands his floating paintings as a metaphor for the difficult situation facing the genre of painting in the 1990s. Painting in the 90s has lost its position, and that means that its position on the wall was in doubt. They had lost their secure position on the wall and had only been connected to the wall with the thinnest of edges. In these works, Scully first used aluminium as a painting surface in his oeuvre. Initially, this was for a very practical reason. Wood would have been too hard to maintain, and copper far too heavy. Since then, Scully has frequently used aluminium as a support. From the early 2000s on, after this major step towards three-dimensionality, Scully's sculptural work rapidly became more important for him. Within the insets, the passenger paintings form a special group, often emotionally charged works integrating rectangular shapes. This reduced composition is dominated by horizontal lines, conveying a certain calmness. An inset has been integrated to the right of the central axis. Does it seem to be an intruder, or is it more a welcome guest? Scully describes it like this. The inset is a passenger within a bigger structure that evokes a kind of mother-child association, something being protected or held by something bigger. Overall, interpersonal relations play a major role in Scully's works, and this is especially noticeable in the insets. My paintings want to tell stories that are an abstracted equivalent of how the world of human relationships is made and unmade.
Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent.
The Aran Islands are located off the west coast of Ireland. Centuries ago, dry stone walls were built to divide the landscape into a mass of small fields. Originally, much of the land was bare rock. It could only be planted by a painstaking effort of building up a fertile soil with layers of sand and seaweed. The stone walls prevented this new soil from being blown off by the wind or swept away by water. The low walls are created by layers of stone set horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. It's no surprise their structure appeals to Scully. I nominate them as art because of their unremitting, austere, repetitive variety. And unlike art made by known artists, we can love them without loving the maker. The ego of the maker is in the wind that blows through the island from every direction. And besides, these are collaborations. So, they are monumental. Yet, they are egoless.
Keep your helmet, keep your light.
In the 1980s, Scully worked with a contested aesthetic space of clashing fields of lines or stripes of different colors, widths, and positions. This changed in the 1990s as his primary focus shifted to the balanced, harmonious compositions in the works in his Wall of Light and Landline series. The earliest Wall of Light paintings were watercolors from one of Scully's trips to Mexico. Here, he captures the impression of the patterns of light and shadow on an old stone wall. The Wall of Light pictures are composed of fields of color set closely together, rather like the elements in a wall. Yet his walls, composed of colors, can become a projection surface for emotions. What do you feel when you look at this work? In calling his series Wall of Light, Scully alludes to the wall of sound technique which music producer Phil Spector developed in the 1960s for pop and rock recordings in his Hollywood studio. While previously instruments were recorded individually, Spector recorded them in parallel, often using several instruments at the same time with reverb added from an echo chamber. The layered instruments and vocals created a dense wall of sound. Pop music with an orchestral texture. Scully's works create a wall of colors, and, in a metaphorical sense, a wall of light. Here, the points where the fields of colors meet and flashes of older paint layers are visible, rather like light between the cracks in a dilapidated wall, are particularly significant. In his oeuvre, Scully repeatedly includes allusions to paintings in the canon of art. Sometimes he engages with the subjects and motifs which interest him, or the method of painting, or even the colors themselves. He once said of this work from 2008,
Margarita, well, this, of course, is an homage to Velázquez. And I have a strong relationship, obviously, to art history, as did Cézanne. And this is an homage to those pinks and greys that you find in the paintings of the Infanta Margarita. And, you know, it's really a concert of these extraordinary grey tones, how you can make grey sing as colour, and how you can make these pinks function with the greys. So it's austere, but I think it has a lot of poetry in it.
Swipe your screen to view Velázquez's painting of the Infanta Margarita Teresa in the app. While Scully was working on Margarita, his personal life was going through a series of positive changes. In 2006, he married the artist Liliana Tomasco. 3 years later, their son was born.
We was standing in the kingdom. And by the mansion.
Can you see the landscape in this painting? The fields with water in between, the line of the horizon and the sky. In the late 1970s, Scully painted the first compositions in his oeuvre that are solely comprised of horizontal elements, a form of minimalist line art. In his Landline series starting in 1999, shortly before the turn of the millennium, he revisited the horizontal line, but now it was clearly connected to landscapes. Scully locates himself in the tradition of the landscape artists of the past, such as Caspar David Friedrich. I think of land, sea, sky, and they always make a massive connection. I tried to paint this sense of the elemental coming together of land and seas, sky and land, of blocks coming together side by side, stacked in horizon lines, endlessly beginning and ending, the way the blocks of the world hug each other and brush up against each other, their weight, their air, their colour, and the soft, uncertain space between them. In the case of Landline Field, the title does indeed unequivocally refer to the underlying model of nature, with the sky above and a field below with yellow, green and blue elements.
So these landline paintings tend to reconnect abstraction with landscape because it's not necessary for us to invent abstraction. It's already been done. So we already have it. So we don't have to stress ourselves about showing how abstract we can be. So I decided to, make these paintings reconnect with nature, to be closer to nature, to bring back abstract painting into the world in which we live.
Boom, 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 boom. I'm gonna shoot you right down, right off of your feet. Take you home with me.
In Ghostmaker and Ghost Blood from 2018, Scully takes a critical view of gun violence in America. At this time, he had already been living for several decades in Tappan, north of New York City. Scully was profoundly affected by an event on the 23rd of November 2014, the shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice by a Cleveland police officer on patrol. The officer thought the young black boy had a real gun, but it was just a toy. Tamir's fatal shooting triggered a wave of protests across the USA, and he came to symbolize the series of black Americans killed by police under dubious circumstances. The sketch Scully made after this event led to a series of 8 themed pictures.
So I decided to make this metaphor of the panel where the stars would be, which represent unity and hope. And I'd use that to demonstrate that the stars had been evicted. And the ghost maker, well, the meaning is clear, that it makes you into a ghost. And also some of the guns, you know, they're very exaggerated. They look a little sexual. And the handles are often wrapped like gangster guns. A gun that you see, for example, in The Godfather, that Corleone uses, it's wrapped. The handles were always wrapped. And I paint them in a way that's kind of violent too. You know, very, very aggressive.
In Ghostmaker, Scully used black spray paint for the field at the top left. Together with the red spray paint and the stripes, it creates an aggressive mood. The gun violence in the United States also played a part in Scully deciding some years ago to leave with his family and go back to the UK. However, recently he has returned to America. He has been an American citizen since 1983.
Sometimes I lay under the moon, I thank God I'm breathing, and I pray don't...
Migration is one of Scully's most recent insets. This color palette is unusual for him, especially with the grass green and yellow tones. According to Scully, his inspiration here came from Claude Monet's Water Lilies painting in London's National Gallery. Migration exemplifies the feeling of being transplanted to a different environment and reality. You remain yourself, but your surroundings are completely different. Nothing in this new milieu resonates with your previous world of experience. On the left, you can see a wood-like structure. The rectangle of colored fields inside appears isolated, trapped with no points of contact. Similarly, on the right, a light rectangle is set inside a square of rich colors, surrounded by different forms and structures. Those two surfaces, taken out of their original contexts, seem to be on display. Almost unavoidably, our eyes are drawn to them. So here, through this dual relocation of surfaces torn out and transplanted somewhere new, Scully's work has a vital, universal message. Everyone, we too, would feel strange and alone in a different country, without our familiar culture, structures, and emotions. Scully's own biography is closely bound to the experience of migration. To begin with, when he was just a child, his family had to leave their home in Ireland involuntarily, for economic reasons. Later, he voluntarily chose to leave the UK and move to New York. Since the early 2000s, Scully has been working on his stacks in different materials. His stack sculptures or towers are not perfectly symmetrical. Instead, the arrangement of the elements creates a sense of balance and rhythm. Scully developed his coin stacks in memory of his father, a hard-working hairdresser. Every Friday night, he brought home his week's tips, all coins, and made stacks of them on the kitchen table. Scully wrote a poem about his father. Happiness. My dad was a barber, a smiler, smiling day long like a hyena, like a Hollywood actress. He smiled and cut and smiled, till his jaw was nearly dropping off from all that humble heroism. To bring to us, the waiting ones, at the week's end, the copper and silver rewards. The dropped in his hands left behind tips that he gathers pirate style into leather bags, to be emptied on our pink Formica dinner everything table. And there, in front of our hopes, he made towers. Towers of silver, towers of brass, all gather in a village, San Gimignano tiny, on a plain pink under a kitchen sky. And we were safe.
Oh, pirates, yes, they're rabbi, so light to the merchant ships. Many
The large-scale painting, Tower, in tones of black, white and grey, is the most recent of Scully's work on show in our exhibition. The projecting elements recall Cubist art, where objects were fragmented from a variety of diverse perspectives and then reassembled in the wrong way. Over the last years, Scully has been investigating Cubism in a series of works. His use of spray paint locates the painting in the area of graffiti street art and lends it a bleaker, rougher character. And the hole, is that a bullet hole? As in many of his other works, here Scully alludes to the Italian avant-garde artist Lucio Fontana, famous for his slashed and perforated canvases. Similarly to Fontana, Scully's real concern is the new space created by the perforations, rather than the damaged canvas, the support material as such. Tower is considered as the trigger for a group of paintings and sculptures exploring this idea.
This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe.
Since the early 2000s, sculpture has played an important role in Scully's oeuvre. His Air Cage series takes his characteristic painting of colored rectangles and lines into a three-dimensional form. A barred cage which, as the title tells us, holds the air captive.
The title, at least, has its roots in a poem by Seamus Heaney called Bogland, where he refers to air as miraculous. And so I thought of air as a kind of living entity, which it is, of course. And the title is somewhat ironic because you can't put air in a cage, especially a cage that's open. So it's the air that's in there is similar to the air that's outside. So it's temporary.
But that's not the only temporary thing here. After all, what is an essential aspect of sculpture as an art genre? The impression of a work constantly changes, and it does so every time the viewer moves position. The structure of this air cage suggests the steel framework of a modern building, and windows allowing us to look inside and through it to the surrounding countryside or urban space. The sculpture communicates with its setting, redefining the space. Scully has worked with a variety of materials for his Air Cage series, using Corten steel for this version and stainless steel for the one inside the Kunstforum. With its layer of rust, Corten steel evokes industrial architecture. Just as with the industrial materials such as masking tape or spray paint in his early works, here too we can read allusions to Scully's working-class roots. We have now reached the end of our tour of our exhibition, Sean Scully, Stories. What stories have you discovered in his works? And what feelings and emotions have they inspired? Scully's works often radiate a spiritual depth, both fascinating and at the same time challenging. They neither guide our eyes nor thoughts along predetermined paths. Instead, he opens up a space where the viewer's own ideas and feelings can freely develop. His images speak of order and decay, loss and hope, and do so in a language inherently human, full of contradictions, but enormously powerful. Sean Scully creates works which move us precisely because they do not offer any simple answers.